Well, welcome everybody, and thank you all so much for joining us for I Love Yarn Day. My name is Allie W. I'm from Yarnspirations, and we'll be here today with two fantastic hosts, Marley and Tamra.
Do you want us to say
class,
hi?
Yeah, go ahead and say hi.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, everybody. Happy I Love Yarn Day.
Yes.
Today's class is going to be a little bit different. So today's class, rather than teaching anything specific, we're really just here to kind of have a Q&A. We're going to talk through some questions that were already submitted to us, and then we'll just answer any of your burning questions that you have while we're here. Marley and Tamara are really two of my favorite experts. I always say I learn so much from them in these classes. So really excited to get started here.
Cool.
Perfect.
I'm happy to be here. I love that there's a lot of people here just to come and just kind of chit chat with us. Like that always feels good. So I know a lot of you don't have your videos up, but I do have my thing on gallery view, so I can see you. So hi, Vicky, I see you. I love being able to see your faces. Hey, T, how are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be here for I Love Yarn Day. It's always like the most beautiful weather. And of course, we have beautiful weather again today. I love October and just it's such a great way to really kick off sweater season and crochet season and knitting season, of course. So always a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and kick things off with our first question, if that works for you both.
Sure.
Yes.
Amazing. So first question that I have here is, do you prefer knitting or crocheting, and why?
Marley, do you want to go first?
Sure, I could do that because so I am bi-crafty. I am a knitter and a crocheter. I learned to crochet before I learned to knit, so I absolutely was hooked on crochet from the very beginning, and I learned in college. And then when I found out I could knit socks, not that you can't crochet socks, but when I found out I could knit socks, I was just like, yes, I have to learn to knit. Since then, I have a very strong passion for knitting. And I know that this might seem like a cop-out, but I promise you it's not. I love both crafts equally. However, I do tend to pick up my knitting needles more than I pick up my crochet hook. And I have only realized that only really in the last couple years. Not like consciously thinking why. It's just like if I have a new yarn and I'm like, oh, I can't wait to try it, my brain instantly goes to knitting as the first thing. So I don't know if that necessarily means I like knitting more. It just happens to be right now in this time of my life. I tend to think more along the lines of what am I going to knit with that versus what am I going to crochet with that, which I find interesting. You know, it is what it is. How about you?
Well, I like you. Excuse me. I started crocheting a long time before I learned how to knit. For years and years, I was just crocheting. I always wanted to learn how to knit, but I didn't know anybody else who knew how to knit, and trying to learn it from a pamphlet just wasn't working for me. So finally what happened was I went to the children's section of our local library and picked up a video. And it was a children's learn how to knit video that taught me how to knit. And I was off and running, and I do really enjoy it. But for me, at the end of the day, see, I look at the yarn and I say, what am I going to crochet with it? What does it want to be? I love knitting, and I find it very soothing and relaxing. I think it's a kind of a meditative experience more for me. Whereas crochet, I think for me, just feels really creative. With crochet, I know that I can always take off in that new direction. I'm not really bound by what I've done before, I guess, in a way, by all those live active stitches, you know, that demand to be dealt with. I just love that I can just take off and be creative and, you know, get halfway through something and then take off in a new direction, and I don't have to have it all pre-planned. So that's probably speaks more to my personality than it does to the crafts themselves. But I really do love just the creativity and the options for crochet, and there's just always something new you can do with it. But I'm sure that's true for knitting too. But at the end of the day, knitting for me is, like I say, it's my meditative, relaxing thing, and crochet is where I really feel creative and driven. So the end of the day, I guess I'd be the crochet person.
Isn't that funny how life kind of takes us in these different routes and how we approach?
Absolutely.
Like, it's just interesting. Anyways, cool. What's next, Al?
Yeah.
Well, question here. So what has been your favorite all-time project to make?
Oh gosh, that's hard.
Hmm. Gosh. Well, I guess I could start with this one. I don't know about any one particular all-time project, but what I love doing is when I can take a stitch pattern and really kind of almost reinvent it in a new way, like find a new way of doing it, find a way to turn it into a color work pattern where you don't have to break the yarn every row, or you can do something really unique and different with it. So I think for me, that's been sort of some of my favorite projects. So I can take a stitch pattern and really get into it and explore all the different ways I can use it, and using it in the round and stripes with colors and things. And I don't know if my followers enjoy it as much as I do. I hope so. They seem to like the series of patterns I'll do with the same stitch pattern for a while, but I really love just kind of doing that deep dive on that stitch pattern itself. For me, that gets me really excited. What about you, Marley?
All right, so this is going to be sort of different in that the thing I'm most proud of. So I have a couple different things. So one is the very first thing I ever crocheted. And are you still on Spotlight, or am I on Spotlight? Like, I can't tell. You guys
Yeah,
see me, or do you see Tamara?
I see you, Marley.
Okay, good. Because I see you. So this is
Okay.
interesting. All right, good.
It's on speaker view, so whoever's talking should be
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So the very first thing I ever crocheted is something I'm really proud about, because it was a queen size Afghan using single crochets. Literally my first stitches were ever made on that blanket. And so the fact that I completed it was actually a really big accomplishment. But outside of that, I don't know if you guys know this. So on my YouTube channel, I do different videos for Red Heart and Yarnspirations and such. But back when the amigurumi yarn first came out, I did an amigurumi unicorn with that yarn, and I am not an amigurumi person. I love it. I think it's fantastic. I actually buy patterns from other designers to publish on my site. Like, so that way my fans can get the amigurumi. For whatever reason, I can't wrap my head around it as far as designing, but following the pattern for this unicorn and making that video, I have since watched that video, and you can see the pure joy on my face creating that unicorn, because I was loving every single minute of it. I just was like, this is the best thing ever. And I still have the unicorn. It's actually in my yarn, what I call inspiration station over there. Cause I just really loved making it. And because it was so out of anything I normally make, which was it was pure fun for me. I don't know. Probably didn't expect that one.
That's so fun.
You watched that video, Allie. You saw it.
I have. That's really just a fun idea that like you doing the video also was you learning how to do it.
Yeah.
That's kind of amazing. So in a similar vein to what was your all-time favorite, what is the biggest project that you've ever taken on or made?
Do kids count?
All our kids are getting pretty big.
they require a lot. I wasn't warned for this. Gosh, that's a hard one for me, Tamara. Do you have a big one? I mean, I often think of a blanket.
Sure. I think, yeah. I mean, I've never done anything crazy. Like, I've always kind of wanted to make I don't know if you guys are going to remember this. If anybody saw this picture way back in the day, it was going around that wasn't Pantone, but it was like something like Pantone, the lady who made that couch rug where it was like a dress and it covered her entire couch. I always think of that when I think of giant projects. I don't know. Some people know the like meme, the picture that went around the internet that I'm talking about, but I've never done anything quite that big. But I would say probably the closest thing I would say is the Moogly Crochet Along. We've been doing it since 2014, 24 squares a year. So the squares themselves are only 12 inches by 12 inches. So that seems kind of a cop out, but the Crochet Along itself has been going on, like I say, for what is that, 7 years now? We're gearing up for 2022. And so it's, people have been arranging those into 24 square blankets, 30 square blankets, 12 square blankets. my blankets are usually 24 or 25 squares, but the great thing is they're all interchangeable. So it is kind of like one really big project over the past 7 years that you can jump in and out of and make it your own. But it's just been so much fun, and it's just been such a labor of love. And there's Facebook groups for it now and everything. And it's just a lot of fun. So even though the blankets themselves are usually, 6 foot by 4 foot or maybe 5 foot by 5 foot, I think for me, that would probably be the biggest project, just because it's kind of one ongoing thing made up of lots of little projects, which keeps it interesting.
That's cool though. So my brain kind of goes differently as far as different as like big project versus size. It's like, it was a big impactful project for me. Mine is knitting. It was knitting a sweater, and I was knitting a sweater for a book called Knitting Plus. And I was using a very, very expensive yarn that was like made out of yak and cormo. So it was very, very pricey. I decided I was going to make this sweater in the round all the way up with cables, 3/4 length sleeves, like really beautiful detail. And then I was going to steek it. And if you don't know what steeking is, that's where you cut your sweater and you make what was a pullover into a cardigan. And I had never done this before, but I figure, it's only yarn, right? So here I am. I made the sweater. It was beautiful. $500 worth of yarn. And I'm like, all right, let's cut it. And I cut it and I made a steek sweater. And then it goes bigger than that, because so it came out really beautiful, right? Everything was perfect. Then it came to time to size it and to do all the grading for all the sizes of it. And if you guys aren't designers, you probably don't really fully grasp how much math and stuff goes into that. And if you follow me at all, I am not very good at math. I am 100% one of those people. I'm not good at it. That's why I employ people who are good at it. Right. And when I first started designing, I wrote a pattern out and I sent it to this tech editor who I still use today. So she saw my very first ever written pattern and she was like, I could see what you're trying to do here. Let me help you. Right. So fast forward, this is now 3 years later. And I took this pattern, this, bottom up in the round steek sweater with cables and lace. And I wrote the entire pattern out and all the sizing. Let me tell you, it took me 2 weeks to do it. What would have taken her maybe 8 hours, right?
Oh, sure.
2 weeks. I sent it to her and she calls me, which I'm like, well, great. I really messed this up, right? She calls me and she said, I just had to call and tell you how proud I am of you, because this is night and day from where we were 3 years ago, and how you've written the work, how you've done the math for the work and everything through it. She's like, I can really tell how much you've grown. She said, and that's not to say that you didn't know what to do then. It's just, you weren't ready for it yet. You know what I mean? Does that make any sense? So that project was there was a lot of growth and learning, and it was a big project in my life because there were a lot of learning aspects to it, and it helped me with my confidence. It helped me, just kind of get noticed on the scene a little bit more because it was so beautiful. And so for me, that was a big project for me. So how about that? How about them apples, everybody?
No, I think it's true, though. I mean, I know when I designed my first garment, which thankfully was not nearly that complicated with lace.
I know, right?
Just a very simple stitches. The stitches themselves were quite simple. But yes, it is. It is a real challenge to figure out, and you're kind of making that decision for everybody. It's like, do you want it a little looser here, a little tighter there? And what does that mean for all the other numbers? It is. You feel like you're something in the Matrix. There's just numbers running in front of your face.
Oh my gosh.
Like,
and then I end up making a silly mistake. Like I'll make like a 6 + 4 and I'll say that's 12 and I'll just go on with that. And then it's like, no, that's not 12.
Yeah, that's the downside.
that always happens to me. Always.
Yeah.
Anyways.
No, I recently had someone come back and tell me, yes, I'd made a very similar error to a sweater that had been out and dozens of people at least had made it. Mm-hmm. Nobody told me. I was like 2 numbers off, but yes, it had, then it populates through.
Yep.
It all worked as long as you didn't, bother counting your stitches at the end of each row.
Who does that?
Clearly people were trusting the
silly
pattern.
Crocheters counting stitches. Just rely on the ones that are on your needle.
It'll be fine. It all worked out.
That's so funny.
All right.
Perfect. Okay, well, I'm going to come to a question that we got while we were in class. So Jane wants to know, she's been working on a granny square Afghan, and when she adds a new color, finds it easier to make a knot after the slip stitch to keep the yarn secure. Is this wrong?
A knot like with the old color and the new color, knotting them together?
Just as a knot. Finds it easier to make a knot after the slip stitch.
I would say as long as you're still weaving in the ends after the knot on the other side of the knot, you're fine. Putting an extra knot in there is never, I mean, as long as it's not a lumpy knot that you're going to be sitting on and, causing a little princess and the pea situation. Yeah. Other than that, if you want to put a knot in there, that's always fine. If you like the way it looks, but I wouldn't trust the knot to be in place of weaving in your ends.
Right.
I would say that's the important thing.
Yeah, I usually will tie my new color around my old color. Like I don't knot them together. Like I'll have my old color and then I just kind of like tie the new color around it where you can like slip it up it. Does that make sense? Do you like my
very descriptive?
You all know what I'm talking about though, right? So like I will tie my new color onto my old color. It's just a tie it on there. So it's not an actual knot, but it's tied on there just enough that it holds the two together as I'm crocheting. And then I still go in and weave in my ends. I never crochet over my ends. And so then I usually will leave that tie on there because it doesn't interfere, because it's not an actual knot. So if it is something that it's like too cumbersome or whatever, I will undo it and then weave in my ends. But yeah, I mean, I do that in knitting too. Like I totally tie my new color around my old color when I change colors in knitting, because it drives me nuts because it just keeps everything a little bit more secure as I'm working through. I know you don't have to, but I totally do. But in knitting, I undo it. In knitting, I undo it and then weave in my ends.
Yeah. I will, especially if I'm adding a new color or a new skein, so I've got two ends hanging out that I know I'm going to weave in later. I don't knot them together, but I will tie them in a little bow, just like a little shoelace bow, so that they're not slipping out or trying to undo while I'm crocheting the rest of the project, and then so I can go back and weave in my ends later. Normally, I love to tell people, weave in your ends as you go, but as I'm sure, Marley, for some projects, you don't want to weave in your ends until you're done. For something like a sweater, where you might be going back and pulling out 2 rows or something, and weaving in those ends will have been a bad idea. Yeah. So yeah, I'll just tie them in a little shoelace bow and then go back and I can pull it out and then weave in those ends when I'm all done.
Yeah, with sweaters and stuff, I typically will leave my ends long. But if I'm doing motifs and whatnot, like I'm totally weaving in as I go because because and if you don't know, you'll know.
Yes.
So
there have definitely been a few of those Moogly crochet along blankets where the end of the year photos were taken with the ends tucked behind to get taken care of, maybe over Christmas break with the kids watching some Christmas movies, break out the Hallmark movies for all those ends. But yeah, I think every designer has had to take a sneaky photo or two with the end still tucked behind because you ran out of time.
Yep.
Amazing. So we have a couple of questions here about finding creativity and getting inspiration for colors. I kind of wanted to dive into those. So first one is, where do you find creativity for designing for your patterns? Where do you get inspiration from?
I guess I could go first. Okay. For me, and this one has been particularly difficult the last couple of years, but I really love going to other stores, like going to IKEA was a big one for me. I love going through the children's section and kind of trying to see, are all the kids' stuff suddenly one color family, or even the same thing in some of the adult sections. What textures are really big right now. I love, I don't watch a lot of TV, but when I do, I love like HGTV type shows and stuff like that. And I really find a lot of inspiration from looking at the way people live and what they're buying and what they're looking for in their homes. Otherwise, I think that, and then sometimes I try and get that same look in crochet, or I'll use it to inspire me to make something that will go with it. So I like to look around and say, you know, if all of a sudden photography was like the hot new hobby that everybody, you know, was doing. And for a while there, a few years ago, it really was. And there was quite a trend for doing like crocheted photo props and things like that. So a lot of it is just trying to kind of see what the trends are out there, both in terms of colors and I think what people are doing. And then for me personally, you know, I've got 3 kids who are always full of ideas about what I should be doing with my time. So I can always ask them what I should make next if I'm out of ideas. And when all else fails, a lot of times it's just the yarn. I'll come in with all these ideas, but if I've got this gorgeous yarn that's been sent to me, I may have intended to make one thing with it and it's in my hands and it's telling me it needs to be something else. So for me, it sounds weird, but I really have to listen to the yarn a lot of the time too. What about you, Marley?
So, I mean, I make a lot more, I think I do a lot more sweaters and stuff like that than you do. I know that you do more, not more, you do more blankets and home decor stuff than I do, not, you know, whatever. I do look a lot on the internet. I don't watch TV. I don't have time to watch TV. It's not that I don't like TV. I just have no time. I look on the internet on what, you know, what people are wearing. And I usually be like, oh, I like that collar, or I like that thumb detail, or, you know, whatever happens to be on something that somebody's wearing. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then I usually will sketch out things like, wonder if I have one of my sketches right here. I can show you guys. Like I'll end up like just kind of sketching something out and kind of playing around with the idea of, well, what if I did this? Or what if I added cables here? Or what if I did, you know, a pocket there? Or I can't find any of my stuff right now. And so I play with that. When it comes to colors and such, believe it or not, I struggle with color because I've talked a little bit about this before in other things that I've talked about, but I tend to gravitate towards rainbow, like even my paper's rainbow. Like I love rainbow. And so when I have a chance to sit down in particular, I have a very distinct habit of like coming together and being like, oh, wow, like this color and this color and this color. And, oh, it's missing a color. And I'll put it in there. And by the time I set it down, look, I have a rainbow. Like, it's like my brain automatically goes to rainbow. So, honestly, I rely a lot on the colors that are already curated from Yarnspirations. Like a lot of the times I'll look at what they have put together because I'm like, oh, those look really great together. I don't know if is the screen on me. Like you can see here are some of my sketches. Like this is just a real simple like pocket shawl, right? But I was like, oh, let's play with those stitches. And then like this is one I was like, what if I did some sort of, you know, diamond S stitches and made the pocket go all the way across? And so, I mean, I just play around quite a bit. I also look at my stitch dictionaries a lot. I love to swatch and play around with the stitch dictionaries and my yarn to kind of see, you know, what looks good. And it might be that sometimes I'll start with the stitch dictionary, and this usually happens with my crochet versus knitting. I'll go rogue on the actual stitch pattern and design my own thing because I'm like, well, what if I did this? So I do that a lot. I don't know if that really fully answered your question or not, but that's what I do. I mean, really, I just half the time I'm picking up my needles and just doing something.
No, I think the stitch dictionaries is a great point. And that's, I have a shelf of stitch dictionaries and I love nothing better than to just open up a brand new stitch dictionary with a pile of Post-it notes. And then I'm just marking out immediately with like little notes. I'll have, you know, towel, hat, you know, all over the book. And then I just go back through that. So it's funny because I know I've had this question before about creativity too. And I'm always, one of the things I always want to point out is when I first started, it was a struggle. Like I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to make next. I was, you know, how could I possibly come up with more than an idea a month? You know, it seemed so hard to come up with ideas. But I think I always say creativity is kind of a muscle, you know, the more you use it, I find the more ideas you're going to have because everything you're like, well, okay, I made that pocket shawl with cables. What if I made it in lace instead? Well, what if I did the pockets this way? And as a designer, I think you want to explore all those ideas. So eventually your list just becomes so long. You're constantly adding to it. So
yeah, that's totally true. Do you remember, Tamara, do you remember the first pattern you ever did like for a publication or for yourself? Like I remember the very first pattern I ever had published for crochet. They were called Fino Matones and they were lace weight gauntlet style fingerless mitts with beads, right?
Oh my.
They took me forever to make. And the whole time I was making them, I thought to myself, how in the world do designers make more than one item at a time? Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Flash forward now, what have I mean, I don't even know how many things I'm doing at a time now. It's just crazy, right? But I distinctly remember having that conversation with one of my friends, like, I do not know how designers make more than one thing at a time, because this I'm like all consumed with this. And now that's just totally not how my business works. Like, I have so many things happening. And just like you said with the pocket shawl thing, like I've got like 12 pocket shawl ideas, right? It's crazy, but I love it.
Yep, it is. It's one of those things where, yeah, once the ideas start flowing, you just got to keep writing them down and hope you get to them eventually before they're completely out of fashion.
Yeah.
And even then they'll come back around.
Hopefully someday.
Hopefully.
Kristen just had a question, which I think we kind of answered as you were going through this, but do you use a project journal or some specific way to keep track of everything that you have ideas for? Or do you practice project monogamy?
I think we're going to have two very different answers for this one.
Just a little bit.
A little bit.
Go ahead, my organized friend.
Well, okay. I am probably a little bit more monogamous. I tend to work on one, maybe two projects at a time, which doesn't say I don't have them all lined up, in order that I'm going to go. But when I'm actually working and designing on them, I do kind of dive in because I enjoy the math, but I have to concentrate. But that said, for my ideas, okay, we're going to have to deeper dive here probably than what you're asking. But basically, I have a whole planner for the year for my blog. And so I have it planned out that Mondays are this, Tuesdays are that, et cetera, and it's all color coded with Post-it notes. So all my pattern
very
ideas,
pretty. It's the very prettiest organization thing ever. And it's something that I will never be, but can aspire to be. It's beautiful, you guys. Her organization is beautiful.
Oh gosh. Well, don't look around the planner, but inside the planner, it's beautiful. But all my ideas, so all my project pattern ideas are on purple Post-it notes. And I will literally put just ideas inside the cover. And then when I plan out the year, I will go through those ideas and pick the ones that are really speaking to me at the beginning of the year and try and plot out okay, that's mittens. It should be in the fall, or that's a water bottle holder. That's for June, whatever. Or it's a Halloween pattern. It should probably go out in September instead of October when I usually do it. Things like that. So I can try and actually plot out my whole year, which isn't to say I don't come up with other ideas in the meantime that I feel like I have to make immediately. And then that purple Post-it note goes back to the cover at the beginning to get saved for a later time. So there are purple Post-it notes that are coming up from, whole different shades of purple from past years that are still coming into the book, and new ones that are going in the covers. And then at the end of the year, they all get transferred over. So I try not to lose them. But then I also keep a list so I can make sure I'm getting everything done in order that needs to be done, with lots of end dates and things like that, which also sometimes get shifted around. So, but that's me. So what about you, Marley? I know you've got spreadsheets. I've seen just a hint of your spreadsheets, I'm sure.
The spreadsheet is purely for you, my friend, because I'm working on a project with you. So it's purely for you.
Well, I appreciate it very much.
You're welcome. I know it's very helpful and it works really great, but Allie can attest to this. That's not how my brain works. Like, my brain is I am an undiagnosed ADHD. I know it. And I am all over the place. And I mean, I have notes literally everywhere of ideas and tasks and videos I want to do, pieces I want to do, collaborations I want to work on, workshops I want to do, books I want to publish. Like, it's insane. My brain is all over. And so honestly, I'm lucky that I employ a really great executive assistant who helps me keep things in order. So she'll be like, hey, you mentioned this. Why don't we work on this? Or, this over here. But I have to have that leeway to kind of if something is sparking my interest instantly and I've got to make that right now, I've got to be able to do that. So I am really everywhere. I am not monogamous at all. If you've ever watch one of my Instagram reels. I actually was like, show me your works in progress without, telling me they're your works in progress. You can see all of my project bags of my works in progress. If you guys got a hint of what's happening over here on the side of my desk, there are 5 patterns over there actively getting worked on right now. 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5. There are 2 over here, and I have 4 that are in the back over there in packages ready to be sent out to contractors to make. So, yeah, it's organized chaos over here. I often joke around and say that my business, my designing, my everything is very much like spinning plates on a stick. And so whichever plate's going to fall is the one that gets my most attention, because I've got so many things happening at one time. I don't know. I mean, think of how great I would be if I was able to focus on one thing at a time. I'd be unstoppable.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness. No. No, I like that. I do use that idea though too with the project bags, because like I will have the projects lined up in my head at least. So I'll have the yarn set aside for them, so each one gets its project bag. I call them like my little to-go bags. I can just grab the next bag when I'm ready for the next project and go.
And a good project bag. I mean, that's part of the whole, I saw a meme the other day. It said, there's the hobby of knitting and crochet. Then there's the hobby of buying the yarn. There's the hobby of buying the project bags. Like, it's all sorts of different, like, euphoric experiences when you're in this craft. And for me, I mean, it's all of that. I mean, look, I'm getting all jazzed up just talking about it. I mean, here's the design. Let me pick out the yarn. Let me find the project bag. Let me choose what needles I want to use. See, I still go to needles immediately. I don't even think about hook, but like what needles I want to use. And then how am I going to practice this? Okay, when should I publish this? All right, now can I bump that out like 5 different times, because that's usually what happens, And so, yeah, like, man, all of that just gets me going. Oh, I love it so much. So excited about that. Like, this is pure adrenaline right here because I'm talking about it. Oh, so fun.
Amazing. Oh goodness, I lost the question that I was going to ask Ness. I just got so jazzed up.
Caught up in the moment.
So jazzed up by all of these answers. Marley, I know you really wanted to share, who do you follow, or where, like, specifically do you, like, are there sites or things that you follow to get more inspiration or other projects?
So, I don't know how much you guys really know about where I began, but I really began designing by sharing my admiration for other designers. So that there's a long history of me sharing my admiration for other designers when I had the Yarn Thing podcast. And so being able to express my appreciation and joy of other designers is actually something I really love to do. So yeah, I was really happy to answer that question, because I've been lucky enough to not only admire these people from afar, but then also like become their friend at the same time, which is a really unique and wonderful experience, So if you're looking at just the knit side, people I like to follow, of course, I like to follow Stephen West because he's very exciting. And if you follow along with me here for a minute, if you think of crocheters, most crocheters are very creative and willy-nilly and just like, let's see what it looks like to put my hook here. Let's do this here. I mean, they're just really amazing, really creative people, right? Not saying that knitters are not. However, knitters tend to be a little bit more regimented. Like, here are my stitches. They're on the needle. This is what I do. Where there's Stephen West, who in my mind is a crocheter who's a knitter. He is the crocheter's mind in knitting. That's like, what if I do this? You know what I mean? And so I love following him because his excitement and his creativity is very infectious to me. So I love following him. Joji Locatelli, I love her style. I love her aesthetic, which is interesting because a lot of her stuff is very black, grays, browns, very, very docile sort of tones, absolutely different from me. Like, I try, guys, I really do try. There's times I try and go like straight browns and creams, and then I'm like, yellow, like, I need a color. So I try, but I can appreciate those. See, you guys are getting my ADHD stuff here, right? I can appreciate those Instagram posts or people's Instagrams that are just really beautifully curated colors, like really beautiful tones. And I'm like, yeah, I want that. You go to mine and it's all colors. Like, there's colors everywhere because I love it, right? But I love Joji Locatelli, because of her style, her aesthetic, I like the way she uses those colors. Who else do I follow in knitting? It's hard. Patty Lyons. I think she is a plethora of inspiration and knowledge. Not only that, but I just love her immensely. If I were to pick a knitwear designer that I would love to emulate my design career behind, it would actually be Melissa Leitman. I think she is prolific in what she does for designing, and you just go out there. She has a book for everything. She is so intelligent, so smart, witty, fun. I love Melissa Leitman. I think she's great. And those are just people just off the top of my head, right? On the crochet side, it's interesting because my all-time favorite crochet designer is Robin Chichulin. She laughs at me when I say that, because that's a huge statement, right? I know a lot of crochet designers. I'm here with one of my friends, one of my best friends, right? But I love the way Robin Chichula does her design. So I love to follow her and see what she's doing. And lucky enough, she and I have joined forces. We're actually like in business together and collaborating together. If you'd asked me about that 12 years ago, I'd have been like, there's no way. And I just like want to pinch myself, right? Of course, I follow Tamara. I have admired Tamara from the very beginning. Actually, the first words I ever spoke to Tamara were, she was in an elevator and we were at CGOA. And I was like, "You're Moogly." She goes, "Yes." And I said, "I love your designs." She was like, "Thank you," as the door was closing.
Yeah, I didn't really have a chance to respond properly. It was literally as the doors were closing. I said, "Thank you." Oh my God, that was Marley Bird. Oh my God, that was Marley Bird as she's gone. Yeah.
So, I love Tamara. I think she is fantastic at what she does. Selena Baca Designs. I think she's great. Brianna K Designs. She's amazing. MJ Off the Hook is amazing. There are so many amazing designers out here on the scene making it happen. And I love to watch what they're doing. I love when I'm able to talk with them. I use the term co-opetition, where technically we're all kind of in competition with each other for your time, your attention, you as an audience, but we love to cooperate and collaborate and connect together and really help one another out. And I think that's something really beautiful. And it's done a lot more on the crochet side of my business than the knit side for whatever reason. I love working with a lot of these trainers that I admire. I think they are amazing. I love Ellen Gormley, Rebecca Velasquez. The sky's the limit. I work a lot with Michelle Wilcox, who's an amigurumi designer, Megan Kreiner, who also does amigurumi. It's exciting. So when you go out there to look for somebody to follow, best thing you could do. Oh, you know who else I love? Tony TL Yarn Crafts. Mm-hmm. She's amazing. She's amazing. But you go out there, if you go and look to find somebody that you like and look at who they're following, just kind of go peek around and see what they're doing. Because there might be some names that you have no idea who they are. They might be newer on the scene, and you just might be like, wow, look at this. Because we all had to start somewhere, right? All of us started somewhere. And there are some amazing people out there doing some really great things. So yeah, I'll take that from you, Tamara. Like I give all the names because there are so many out there. There's Jessie at Home. She's amazing. There's just so many names that are just so wonderful. Just go and take a peek at all of the different people that the people you do follow, because that can start getting your creativity really going out there. There you have it. Next question, Allie.
Amazing. I did just want to give a time check because it really is flying. So we're at, we only have 20 minutes left, which is kind of incredible. So there's a couple of questions that are a little bit more specific to projects or fixing things that I definitely wanted to get to. Here's the first one. So it's a multi-part question. So I'm going to read it slowly to make sure I get it all out. Is there a formula to determine the number of stitches to increase or decrease if you've cast on more or less stitches because you've changed the yarn or needle size for a particular pattern?
You know what I want to say? I want to be like, and I'm out.
No, you're up. Cast on, I believe, was more specifically knitting. So.
Oh, man.
No, okay. You know what? I was thinking about this. full disclosure, we got a little peek at some of the questions ahead of time. Thank goodness, because I did want to give this one some thought. And I would say there's not so much a formula, but you're going to have to take into account your stitch multiples for the stitch pattern you might be making, and then your own personal gauge. And I think those two items are what makes it really impossible to say that there's a specific, like you've gone up from DK to worsted, add 2 more stitches or something like that. I wish it was that simple. It would be awesome as a designer if it was that simple. Oh my gosh. But unfortunately, I think there's probably too many variables unless there's some, if you've got a magic formula, Marley, please do share it. I would love to learn.
Pay a tech editor to look at your pattern. That's my formula.
Yeah. I think unfortunately you have to make a new gauge swatch and then make sure you can hit whatever that stitch multiple is for the pattern you're making. And then, I wish it was that easy. Gosh.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Sorry.
I find, we've done enough of these classes together. I find that the answer usually when people are asking a question about using a different hook, using a different needle, it tends to be swatch, swatch, swatch. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I always say I'm a big fan of dishcloths, handmade like washcloths and dishcloths, because then you can swatch without feeling like you're just not getting to your project yet. You're making a dishcloth, you're making a washcloth, you're practicing that stitch pattern and making your little swatch, but it doesn't have to be just something you did. You can make a little washcloth or dishcloth. Call it a different project.
Amazing. Question here about blocking. How do you handle blocking a large project?
So I use blocking mats. I love them. I use blocking mats. I use rust-proof pins. And I always wash and block my projects. I very seldom steam block my pieces. If I'm in a pinch, I will steam block them, but more often than not, I love to put them in some wool wash in my sink and wash and block them out. Now, if it's a blanket, I usually put it in my tub. If I can't put it in the washing machine. Full disclosure, I very seldom will put items I make in the washing machine. I like to hand wash just about everything because I figured if I've put that much time into it, I'm just going to hand wash it. But if it's a blanket, I put it in the tub. And then I joked around about this the other day. I rinse, or I let the water out, and then I get in there like I Love Lucy, like I'm stomping on the blanket to get as much of the water out of the blanket as possible, like as she used to stomp on the grapes. And then I will sometimes put that like in a dryer to air dry, like an air dry, and then just kind of fold that out. But for the most part, I wash and block everything, especially like if it's a shawl, or I wash and block my pieces of a sweater before I seam them together. Crochet items, now let me go back here. I wash and block just about everything that's not acrylic. Most of my acrylic, I don't block it usually unless I'm going to steam block it, which kills acrylic. So, and that's just a completely different style of task I have to do, but very rarely do I block acrylic. How about you, Tamara?
I actually block acrylic all the time. The Moogly Crochet along squares have always been acrylic, just because, I've got kids and a dog. For me, that is practical. And I like making the big blankets and stuff out of yarns like, Red Heart, Super Saver, or With Love, yarns like that are 100% acrylic. Because when it is something like a blanket, I can just throw it in the washer and dryer once it's all together. I'll block the individual squares, but then once the blanket's together, that's a washer dryer item in our house. But in general, when I have to block large items, sometimes I'll get them good and wet, pre-soak them, and then pin them out. I too use blocking boards and pins. I'm a big fan of the wider, I think there's a couple of different manufacturers who make them, but sometimes you can get blocking pins. It's a whole bunch of pins at once.
Yeah. I love those.
Blockers.
I bought
those
a whole bunch of those recently.
Yeah. And I've got the wires for shawls if you want a curved line and all that stuff. I rarely use those just because they're a little more difficult to use, I think, at the end of the day. But when I have a really big project, especially if it's something lacy where maybe I've used an oversized hook to create that crochet lace, because again, most of what I do is crochet. Instead of pre-soaking it, because I find when I pre-soak it, sometimes when I go to lay it out, it's too easy to pull. It's too easy to pull in different directions if it's a really open stitch. So what I like to do, and it just feels more comfortable for me too, for my hands, is I will actually pin it all out exactly the way I want it dry. And then I have a spray bottle where I've got a mix of distilled water and my, the wool fiber wash I prefer to use mixed together. And I'll just give it a couple of shakes and then just spray it down and soak it right down in place. I find that, like I say, especially with lace items where you can really stretch that out in different directions accidentally. Once it's wet, I find it's really hard not to do that. So for me, I like to actually pin it out dry. And it's also just more pleasant, especially, when it's like in the middle of a cold winter and, you don't want to just have your hands in like the wet yarn, you know what I mean? The wet, soggy stuff. I will just take up a whole basement floor and a whole bunch of pins and block it out and then spray it down. Sometimes you have to pat it. It's funny. It's the silliest thing. I'll spray it out with my spray bottle and then I will go back and just pat the yarn to make sure it all goes down in the yarn and doesn't just evaporate off the top. But I would rather do that sometimes than the heavy,
Now, see, and that's like the most exciting part to me. I love watching the lace stretch and open up. Like it's like magic, dude. I love it. I
think I get really aggressive. I think I'm just naturally really aggressive with it. So this is my way of keeping myself under control so I don't overdo it.
Awesome. So there's a question here that we got in the chat today. Patricia wants to know if there's any way to keep Tunisian crochet projects from curling.
That's going to have to be a you question. I don't Tunisian crochet.
I don't do as much of it as I would like to, primarily because it takes longer and I'm always in a rush. But there's a couple things you can do. When you're first starting your project, switch back and forth between, like throw in a row of Tunisian purl stitches right up the beginning. So you get that opposite curl. That can help with it a little bit. Going up to a bigger hook can be a big help. I find Tunisian crochet takes a much bigger hook than what's recommended on the label. Normally, like if I'm making a sweater or something, I'll usually go to a bigger hook recommended on the label just because I want more drape. Tunisian, well beyond that. A lot of times when I've done Tunisian things in classes and stuff, we'll be using like a worsted weight yarn and like an M Tunisian hook. So using a bigger hook is a really big help with that as well. Failing all that, you're already well into your project. Going back and adding a regular crochet border, just, all the way around can help a little bit. And then you're going to be back to steaming and blocking it is what you're going to have to do once it's all done. Other than that, you can try and work with the curl a little bit. If it's a hat, let the edge curl up and make it a feature. I mean, I just don't Tunisian crochet because I knit, and like there's a part of me that's very much like most people Tunisian because it looks like knitting, and if I knit, why should I have to do Tunisian? But one thing to remember is that when you do stockinette stitch and knitting, it naturally curls. Like that is what it does on itself. So even in knitting, to prevent a curl in your stockinette, you have to add a border or an edging of some sort. So I'm assuming that that's very similar to what you're doing when you're doing like the Tunisian simple stitch and such. You have to have a border to it. It's essentially because it's the same. It's a very similar movement. Effect. So, yep.
Great. A follow-up question here on blocking. Do projects need to be blocked every time you wash them?
If you think of it this way, if you have a shirt that you would wash, and then in order to wear it again, you'd have to iron it to make it look decent, to make it look the way it's supposed to again. Sort of the same idea with blocking. If you have a shawl and you wear it quite a bit and it goes back to where it's not all the way crumply or stuff, but it's just not living its best life, you're going to want to wash it and block it out again to get it back to where it is. And so I'm not telling you to iron your projects. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying kind of use that as like your sort of idea of, hey, every time you wash it, you are going to want to block it out, because that's kind of like your ironing aspect of it. It's that finishing bit of it, because it opens up your stitches. It opens up what you need it to be.
Yeah, I've always compared to when you buy a really nice sweater from the store and you flip over the label and it says lay flat and reshape to dry.
Yep,
that's what blocking
same idea.
Is.
Yep,
if you've never blocked before, but you've laid flat and reshaped a sweater that you bought from the store, you've blocked. You just, you don't have to use pins for blocking either. You don't have to do the whole big thing. You can basically lay it out flat to dry. Yep. So yeah, for things like sweaters, like really fine sweaters or shawls, I might reblock. But like I said, once I've made a big old family size acrylic blanket, that thing's going in the washer and dryer. I'm not
Once
blocking
the
that thing again.
photographs have been taken, it's free game.
I mean, that thing's getting turned, it's getting taken outside for a picnic.
Yeah.
It's, it's getting thrown in the back of the car for, movie night. It's
Yeah.
It's part of the furniture at that point.
Awesome. So we got a question here in chat, and it kind of goes back to a question that we got beforehand. So Deborah is a beginner and she really wants to knit a cable knit cardigan, and people keep telling her that it's going to take her years to get there as a beginner.
Nope. I say these people, you don't need that negativity in your life. You can do it. Deborah, if you can do cables and you can knit, you can make a sweater. I had beginner knitters who had only been knitting for about 10 weeks take my class, my stitch along class with Yarnspirations this year, where we did a knit cardigan in the round with a cable raglan, and we steeked it. Beginner knitters, and there was a pocket. I mean, these people, this was like their second project they'd ever made in their life. So don't believe anybody telling you you can't do it, because you absolutely can do it. Just make sure you do your gauge swatch and make sure you wash and block your gauge swatch, because you're going to wash and block your sweater too. So you want to make sure it fits, and just have confidence and be diligent about it. You absolutely can do it. I hate it when people tell people that they can't do something. It is sticks and string, y'all. Sticks and string. You can do anything you want. Deborah, do it and tag me when you do it. So I will be your cheerleader. I will be your personal cheerleader.
No, I have to agree. I was only knitting for a couple months when I decided to knit a sweater. Now, I didn't design it myself. I definitely followed somebody else's pattern. But absolutely you can do it. Just take your time, follow the instructions, go to YouTube when you don't know the stitch. And like Marley said, use your gauge swatch. And then I would say if there was one other detail, maybe don't use fingering yarn.
Or use fingering yarn, because it'll hide a lot of mistakes. No, absolutely. True. Yeah. Just like a worsted weight yarn. Follow, you know what? Honestly, if you've never made a sweater before and you're like, okay, maybe I should make a sweater first, I have a beginner sweater course that we did on my YouTube channel. Start there. And it's very simple. It's stockinette, very simple stuff. And then if you're like, wow, okay, this is great. Then you could do the steek sweater if you want. And steeking, I saw that question. Was it steeking, you guys? It's where you knit something in the round and you purposely cut your knitting to make it come apart. So like you make something that's a pullover and you turn it into a cardigan. It sounds way more scarier than it is. It's the coolest thing ever. I
would say Google some YouTube videos of it. It is spooky season. So
it is the coolest thing.
You can terrify yourself watching people cut up their sweaters.
Awesome. It is so awesome. But yeah, you could absolutely do it. Start with a kid sweater to begin with. If you want to start somewhere, I know there's a lot of kid cable sweaters on Yarnspirations you could test out before you jump in, if you need to build some confidence. But I say go for it. Don't let anybody stop you. Do it. Do it.
I'm a big fan. Yeah. I knit a baby sweater and it was like, oh, these are all the exact same moves, just that much quicker and easier to practice if you've got a baby to knit for first. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And they'll love it.
Don't be afraid. Do not be afraid. My very first knit project, you guys, was a pair of knit socks. The very first sweater I ever knit was the first sweater I ever designed. Don't be afraid. There's no reason. Balls to the wall, guys. Which, do you know where that term comes from? It's from pilots, where it's like a ball on the handle of their gear stick. And so it's like balls to the wall to like full throttle. Did you know that? I looked it up. Thought I'd share that with you. I did
not know that.
I know. I looked it up because I was like, am I saying something dirty? Because I didn't want to say something dirty, but it's not. It's actually, that's what it means.
There you go. Good to know.
Thought I'd share with you.
A really great question here. We only have about 5 minutes left, so just flagging that. If you find a mistake several rows later, i.e. you did the wrong stitch in the pattern, or maybe your error, their error, who knows? How do you go back to correct it?
In knitting, you can tink, which is unknitting. It's knit spelled backwards. You can tink back several rows to get to where you need to be. You could add a lifeline and rip back all the way down. Or you could go to, if you think of knitting as like a grid, so you can knit to where that stitch is down here, knit to where the grid is, to where the stitch is up here on your needle, and then drop that stitch down to correct whatever stitch that is, and then pick up your stitch again to come back up. All of which you can learn on the Marley Bird YouTube channel. I don't think you want to learn it here. So there's a lot there. It can be done though. It can be fixed. In crochet, I'm gonna let Tamara take that one.
Crochet is a little harder, and it is unfortunately one of those things where it kind of depends on the project. Probably 99 times out of 100, you're going to have to just pull back. Frog, because you rip it, you rip out your stitches. Unfortunately, you just have to go back to that stitch. The upside, it's crochet. You've only got the one live loop. You're probably not going to have to put in a lifeline. That said, there have been times where I literally missed a stitch, like in a row. You could tell there was one stitch missing. And I took a length of like a foot or two of yarn, and I went back in and I put that stitch there and wove in the ends, and you couldn't tell.
Yep.
So you kind of have to look at the project and play with it. You know, take a couple feet of yarn from the other end of the skein and see if you can squeeze that extra stitch in there, or use your sewing needle, your yarn needle, to kind of duplicate the look of that stitch. Once in a while, you can finagle it. But unfortunately, doing that ladder down like you can in knit just doesn't typically. No. Crochet,
that's because in crochet,
that way.
Yeah, you're like binding off your stitches as you go in crochet, so they're not live like in knitting. You know what else I've done as far as like what you talk about putting a stitch in? I've decided in a project before that I wanted a pocket, and so I've like measured out where I wanted the pocket. Let's say I wanted the pocket this wide. I cut my yarn in that row, like in the middle, and then I unraveled it both ways so that I had an opening now, because you're binding off your stitches in crochet, they're both secure, right? So then I get to where my ends are, where my tails, now my tails are long enough that I can weave them in. And then I added like a cuff, or not a cuff, but you know, like a trim or whatever to the pocket. And then I just made an inside pocket, and then poof, I have a pocket. Like it's so cool.
Yeah. And you can do that to cut out a bad stitch too, if you wanted to, or something like that. And then just pull back each end, put in the right.
Yep. There's so many things. I mean, and to me, like sneaky knitting, that's no big deal. Cutting my crochet is a big deal. Like, I'm like, what am I doing? Oh my gosh, what am I doing? But it can be done. It can be done.
I have a video on the Moogly Blog YouTube channel as where if you realize, for instance, like you're making 2 sweater fronts or something, and you've made one way too long, but oh my gosh, that would mean you've already put in your armhole shaping. You don't want to pull back out that whole side. You can in crochet as well, run a lifeline and cut off the bottom of your stitches, and then just put in a new chain across the bottom, a new foundation chain to secure the bottom of those stitches, and just pull off that bottom section as well. So unfortunately, it kind of depends on the individual, you know, like what exactly happened that you need to fix, but there are ways to do it. Just gonna have to be creative a little bit.
Yeah. Like when you're on a deadline and it's like, you don't have time to rip something out, you get really creative. Like you learn where you can cut your work.
For sure.
Ask me how I know.
Well, I always talk about the sweater one, because I was actually making a sweater that went side to side, like one front hem to the other front hem. And I got to the other side and realized I'd made one of the very first front hem too long. So I had to cut off an entire, like the first 10 rows I made were the ones that had to go. The rest of the sweater was fine. So yeah, you'll find ways. You find ways.
Yeah. That'd be a whole nother video series though. Things that I goofed up, but then turned into gold.
Amazing. Well, you know what? We are at time, and we did get to most of the questions. I apologize if you had questions that we didn't get to. I think we got to most of them today. So I really appreciate everybody joining us for I Love Yarn Day. And I always say I learned so much. So thank you both, Marley and Tamara. This was fantastic. Great way to spend I Love Yarn Day.
It was nice to see you again today, Allie, and you too, Tamara.
Yes, I always have so much fun when I get to spend the day with you guys. And what better way to spend I Love Yarn Day? So I hope you all get to head over to your local Michael's if you haven't already, and stock up on some yarns and give these things a try.
Yeah, go check out those cake shop yarns.
Yes, and awesome. The Bernat Stitch and Win is happening now too. So
And the cake shop yarns are great.
Stitch and Win, you could win $5,000.
I got nothing. That trumps me.
Amazing. Well, perfect. Thank you all so much for joining us. We definitely hope to see you again at another Michael's Community Classroom.
Bye, Vicki.
All right. Bye, everybody. Have a great day.